morning, the most news in the morning, period. Weekdays 6 Eastern.
So the New York Times suggested poor discipline and outright corruption among Afghan forces is responsible for at least some of these weapons getting into the hands of the Taliban. What are some of the other routes that you know of?
Part of the problem is there's been a lot of container theft over the last year and a half. Containers moving from the port of Karachi up into Afghanistan on trucks into U.S. forces have been broken into, have been robbed completely. And this is more of a problem than just the Taliban drinking Red Bull and listen to iPods. I mean, they're getting equipment out of these things. That's one.
So the Pentagon sends these containers full of weapons to the port of Karachi.
Not so much weapons all the time. It's body armor sometimes. They try not to send weapons that way, but sometimes ammunition gets put in these things.
Right.
So they pick up some of that stuff there. The other issue, too, is that a lot of Afghan police, we've lost 1,000 Afghan police this year. Sometimes you'll have entire governor's compounds that are overrun. They'll lose 10, 15 guys. They'll recover weapons and they'll recover ammunition during those encounters as well. And then sometimes there is theft or sale by Afghan security forces. About a year ago when there was an attempted assassination of Karzai, it was a senior Afghan official, a general, that sold those weapons to the Taliban who tried to kill Karzai with them.
You know, the Government Accountability Office had some criticism that it leveled at the U.S. government for, quote, significant lapses in accountability, failing to account for thousands of rifles, some of which ended up in the hands of insurgents, some of which were used on the battlefield to kill American soldiers.
Some of the contractors that are out there, like some of these companies, are spending a lot of time doing accounting, just doing the accounting of this. So I don't see that as the biggest problem. The larger problem is loss during combat operations.
Right. Now, the U.S. military says it's not a widespread problem. Do you agree?
I don't think it's that widespread. And I think most of the loss happens when we lost 1,000 police there last year.
Right.
That's when most of the loss occurs.
So how is the military going to have to change its supply lines then to respond to this increasing transfer of weaponry and ammunition?
Clearly, we've gotten a free ride for 6 or 7 years out of shipping things from the port of Karachi up through Pakistan and in. Our supply lines are going to have to come from the north now, and the administration's preparing for that. Things are going to have to come through Kazakhstan, Russia, Uzbekistan as they come down into Afghanistan. It's going to be a completely different supply chain.
That's going to be a lot more complicated than taking them by ship to the port of Karachi and then just running them up the roads in Pakistan through the Khyber Pass.
More of an expense, and the Russians are going to have more of a say because the Russians have come out and said, okay, you can bring non-lethals through our area, but not lethals.
Right. You know, one of the topics that we've been kicking around here for this in the past week, Gary, is Iran, because of the meetings between Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and President Obama. But we talk about Iran in terms of what's happening in Afghanistan. There's a fellow who's running for the presidency, and the elections are coming up in a couple of weeks, Moshe Rezai. He was the head of the Revolutionary Guard Corps back in the 1980s. What would happen if he won?
His election will complicate things greatly. This is probably the most dangerous man in Iran. He was a candidate in 2005 and withdrew 2 days before the election, which allowed Ahmadinejad to get elected. Ahmadinejad pales in comparison as a radical. Moshe Rezai is wanted in connection with the bombings in Argentina in 1994. Moshe Rezai is the commander of the IRGC, sent tens of thousands of people to their death when he commanded the besiege, which the IRG sat over during the war. This guy has blood all over his hands. He is the most hostile individual in that country toward the U.S., and he managed most of those terrorist operations that were conducted against the United States and Lebanon in the 1980s. Wow. This will be a bad thing if he gets elected.
And one other issue. I know you were in field ops. You didn't deal so much with relations with Congress, but what Nancy Pelosi said about the CIA misleading Congress, is there something to that?
No, there's not. I have to say this, that those committees inside of Congress are, by law, the United States, the CIA has to brief them in what we call notifications. If there's covert action is approved by the president as a presidential finding, they will go in and they will, do a presentation of this. This is all documented. There are lawyers in CIA doing these presentations. They're not going to lie to the Congress. After 1973 and Watergate, CIA learned its lessons and is very, very careful on this. And, from time to time, has there been an oversight? Something's been missed? Yeah, that may have occurred. But on a program like this, a covert action program where a presidential finding was written, they're presenting clearly. And I've been down. I've briefed Congress, and we are very, very careful, and no one's lying to Congress.